Carson Beck, is he Miami's missing piece or an overhyped transfer?
You are Locked On Canes, your daily podcast on the Miami Hurricanes, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
I am Alex Donno, University of Miami alumnus, co-host of Locked On ACC, and writer for Canes County at Rivals. And thank you so much to the everydayers for making Locked On Canes your first listen and your first watch today. We're available free wherever you get your podcasts. We're free on YouTube. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. On this episode, we'll talk with our special guest about Miami Hurricanes marketing and brand awareness, because the Canes just got the best free exposure possible with their logo on the biggest movie in the world from this past weekend. We'll talk about top recruits locking in Miami visits, including the #1 overall player in the class of 2026, top receiver in the class of 2026, and others. But let's talk about the impact of Carson Beck as we bring on our special guest, good friend of the show, my former colleague at WVUM Radio at Miami. He's a former Sebastian the Ibis. Maybe we'll talk about Sebastian's girlfriend later on in the show. But Rudy Tomarchio, I want to talk some Carson Beck. Pro Football Focus has their top 10 quarterbacks ranked for 2025. We'll get into the entire list, but notably, they've got Miami's Beck at number 3. And I brought up in the opening, like, Carson Beck, obviously, he's replacing a stellar quarterback who's about to be a first round, potentially first overall pick in the NFL draft, but you could still make the argument he could be the missing piece, because Miami nearly was about to go into a season without a high-profile transfer like this. But then you see the comments from some rival fans about Miami adding Beck and is overhyped. This guy's not going to do anything there. He's overrated. Number 3 in this top 10 list. Like, Rudy, do you think that's about right for Carson, or would you rank him higher or lower?
Here's the thing. I don't have problems with Carson Beck at 3 based off his performance last year at Georgia. We can argue all day about how he didn't have the pieces, about how that team offensively looked very out of sync, and that at the beginning of the year, look, even admittedly myself on your shows during the early part of the season, we all criticized Carson Beck a little bit. And as the season began to progress, you realized, oh, he just doesn't have the dudes there this year. So I'm okay with him at 3. I more have an issue with the rest of the list. I'm looking at the way the rest of the rankings go. This reminds me, I'm wondering if this is the same group at Pro Football Focus that put together the list that had Cam Ward like nowhere near the first day draft prospect only a couple of weeks ago. Because as soon as I saw that, I said, I don't know if I want to use this information anymore, because there's no way that this is accurate. So Cape Klubnik had a great year at Clemson. Sam Levitt had this, horse named Cam Scadaboo to hand off to. So I don't know how, if you want to keep Beck at 3, I'm okay with that. But how are those 2 quarterbacks in front of you? Not to knock them for any reason. They're not bad. They're just, I don't think they're 1 and 2 in college football next year.
Yeah, I think Levitt, Levitt probably to me belongs in the top 5, but maybe a couple spots lower than he is at number 2. And of course, Cam Scadaboo had a big reason why Arizona State had the season that they had. But I do like Sam Levitt a lot. As far as Cade Klubnik being number 1, people will bring up that Klubnik and Carson Beck had a head-to-head week 1 last year. And of course, neither of them played defense, so they didn't, have anything directly to do with stopping the other. But obviously Beck outplayed Klubnik in that head-to-head. Klubnik didn't throw for a single touchdown. He threw for 142 yards. Beck in that game, 278 yards, 2 touchdowns. I don't think he had any interceptions in that one. But I think if you zoom out, probably the reason why they have Klubnik ranked so high is he did have a better statistical season than Beck. Threw for a couple hundred more yards last year at Clemson, threw less interceptions. That was an issue for Beck last year with the 12 INTs. But then, Rudy, you talk about the supporting cast. Beck's was down last year compared to the year prior. But then also, Carson is playing a full-on SEC schedule, and Georgia actually had the toughest of those. Georgia went up against 8 of the top 30 defenses in the country. Klubnik, the toughest defensive matchup he went up against was against Georgia. They only scored 3 points in that game. So the schedule was definitely tougher for Beck. And I think that's something people could probably focus on more, is that, I think Miami could still add a few more weapons for him to throw to in the transfer portal upcoming in April. But he's going to be going from the toughest SEC schedule last year to a tough-ish ACC schedule. There's a big difference. There should be more opportunities for Beck to shine this year.
100%. I mean, look, let's take a deep breath real quick. And let's channel our inner Bruce Warner truth teller and go through this list and say that the rankings really kind of look like it's all based on a what have you done for me lately kind of piece towards the end of the college football season. Because, yeah, Cade Klubnik didn't look good at the beginning of the season, but Clemson ended up winning the ACC. They made it in the college football playoff. That's probably why they're there. That's why Drew Aller's on that list at number 4, because they made it so far in the college football playoff. Arch Manning has a bunch of hype because you can argue and say that, well, Quinn Ewers declared for the draft because they were going to go with Arch Manning no matter what. And look at the rest of the list. I mean, Kevin Jennings at 10, yeah, SMU had a great year. That Duke game where they ended up winning and pulling it out, they caused 6 turnovers. And I think like 5 of those were on Jennings himself. There was a chance of even more turnovers that, Duke didn't end up recovering, like multiple fumbles. So there's pieces here where it's like Carson Beck will have the, pick of the litter in terms of his offense. And really, he was that missing piece for Miami. I'll argue that point. Yeah. Say that he was a missing piece because we saw, speaking of what have you done for me lately, we saw what happened in the Pop-Tarts Bowl in that fourth quarter, in that second half with Emory Williams. As soon as we started running the ball and that defense started letting Miami down and Iowa State gets back in the game, we could not have our quarterback throw us back to victory. We could not have that same kind of handling of the offense. Obviously, nobody's Cam Ward. And also at the same time, it just didn't seem like that team was really rallying behind Emory Williams in that regard. So to have a guy like Carson Beck with all this pedigree, understanding, top tier offenses in college football, who's been around for a long time, that's invaluable. So even if his numbers don't stack up to Cam Ward's from last season, he still is a valuable part of this offense that I think helps bring Miami a lot of recruiting buzz and also just brings a lot of people's interest, whether they want to transfer and join him at Miami, because there is that rumor still that there may be one wide receiver coming in the spring transfer window. So, yeah, I think this was a home run. Nothing's changed since the last time we spoke about that.
Yeah, I think Carson Beck is one of a handful of missing pieces. I think he's a missing piece, because another missing piece, I think, was finding the right defensive coordinator. I hope Corey Heatherman is that. We're not going to know till we know. Fixing the defensive secondary. Xavier Lucas was a gigantic addition among the 4 other DBs that Miami has already brought in. Miami's got to be more balanced next year. And I think they can win with Beck, but it can't be all on Carson Beck's shoulders. And last thought on this list, and I'm sure, and by the way, I want to go over this one on Locked On ACC as well with Kenton Gibbs, because you do have 3 ACC quarterbacks in there, including 2 of the top 3. So we'll be talking about this on Locked On ACC, but I know Florida fans will see this and say DJ Lagway is ranked way too low, with all the hype he's got in heading into next year. Texas fans will probably be pissed about Arch Manning being number 6, because I think he's the odds-on Heisman favorite heading into next year. So they're going to feel like he is way too underhyped there. And you brought up Drew Aller. I don't get it, because I feel like every time Penn State obviously has had a damn good football team, but I don't feel like Drew Aller is anywhere near the primary driver to that. So I always feel like he gets very overrated. So that one, I don't really get him being so high. He would not be in my personal top 10, if I'm being honest.
Also, is Florida State going to sue Pro Football Focus for not having Thomas Castellanos in the top 10? I mean, that was a huge transfer.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not even sure if that dude's a quarterback. I mean, he's a running back who lines up at quarterback, and he may or may not quit on his team 8 games into the season. We'll see. Stay tuned to see how that one goes. But another thing I want to get into on the other side, in order for Carson Beck to succeed, we talk about Miami maybe adding another weapon or 2 coming up in April. I want to talk about the weapons Miami has specifically at the tight end position, because Elijah Lofton, who had a really efficient true freshman season, he's actually was the highest rated true freshman player on Pro Football Focus last year. Now, didn't play as many snaps as a lot of other freshmen in the country, I'll make that clear, but very efficient with the reps that he had. Had a receiving touchdown, a rushing touchdown, 150 receiving yards. Is Elijah Lofton going to break out this coming season? You want to keep it locked, my friends. We're only getting started on this brand new episode of Locked On Canes. My friends, it is tax season. And you know what that means? It means TurboTax has your back. This is a message from sponsor Intuit TurboTax. Taxes was dealing with piles of paperwork and frustrating forms, and then waiting and wondering and worrying if you're going to get to any money back whatsoever. Now, taxes is easily uploading your forms to a TurboTax expert who's matched to your unique tax situation. An expert who's backed by the latest technology, which cross-checks millions of data points for 100% accuracy. While they work on your taxes, you get real-time updates on their progress, and you get the most money back guaranteed. While you go about your day, no stressing, no worrying, no waiting. Now, this is taxes. Intuit TurboTax. Get an expert now on TurboTax.com. Only available with TurboTax Live full service. Real-time updates only in iOS mobile app. See guarantee details at TurboTax.com/guarantees. Thank you for making this episode of Locked On Canes your first listen and your first watch today. For your next listen, make sure you check out Locked On ACC. Kenton Gibbs and I take you around the conference, football, basketball, lawsuits, everything that happens around the ACC. We go over it, available free wherever you get your podcasts and available free on YouTube. So, Rudy, heading into this upcoming season, the tight end room, you've got a couple of young guns coming in. Luka Gilbert and Brock Schott is true freshmen. Like Gilbert is gigantic, and he could end up being a guy who could probably play tackle or tight end, maybe like another Eric Winston at Miami, potentially. We'll see how that plays out. Brock Schott, more of a receiving threat who already is turning heads in offseason workouts. But in terms of the more experienced guys, Miami adds a transfer in Alex Bauman, who could be a really good red zone weapon, well-rounded guy, can block as well, had 212 receiving yards, scored 7 touchdowns last year at Tulane, so he can be a receiving threat as well. But the one that we're expecting to be the dude in that room and break out this year is Elijah Lofton, who had 2 carries for 30 yards and a rushing touchdown, 9 receptions for 150 receiving yards and a touchdown. He's also a really capable blocker. And Elijah Lofton, Rudy, is someone Miami can line him up just about anywhere. He can play multiple different positions if needed.
Yeah, high hopes for Elijah Lofton, but really, thankful that we got Bauman in from Tulane, because the one thing that Miami did last year that I think everybody loved and was missing for so long was utilize the tight ends in so many different ways. And it wasn't just one tight end on the field. There were multiple times over the course of the season that you saw 3 and 4 tight end sets, including in short yardage situations and third downs, third and mediums. You saw them really shine. And at different points in the season, everybody had their kind of moment to shine. Like at the beginning of the season, it was Cam McCormick. At the certain point, it seemed like the stat was going to be, if Cam McCormick scores the opening touchdown, Miami's guaranteed to win, because it happened like the first 3 weeks in a row. And then you had Riley Williams, who's now transferred out, but who was like the saving grace against Virginia Tech with that scramble play with Cam Ward. Then you saw Elijah Lofton's moments of brilliance, including in Louisville, before he got hurt, because he got that shot to the ribs, I think, on that longer play.
Right.
But what I love about Elijah Lofton is that they used him early, and they used him, like you mentioned, you could line him up anywhere. You could put him at, H-back. You could put him out, you could line him up at the end of the line. You could swing him out wide. Like there's so many ways of using him. So yes, he should be a feature of the offense, but having depth in that tight end room, all 4 of those guys are going to end up on the field at some point this year in the same set. So the experience and the snaps, and then also having that balance of having some young guys that can, help out, I think there's going to be room for them to grow. So I'm really excited for that entire unit.
Yeah, and Matt Shodell at Kane Sport brought up a good point. If you project the stats of that group, Elijah Arroyo was the top receiver in the tight end room, was one of Miami's top 4 overall receivers, and he had like 500 yards and change, had under 600 receiving yards, but that was in a situation where Miami had a ton of receivers putting up big-time stats. Restrepo, Jacoby George, Isaiah Horton, I think being the top 3, with then Elijah Roy at number 4. But since Miami, at least at this moment, doesn't have as many proven wideouts, that maybe Beck might lean more on that tight end room. And maybe you could see a guy like Elijah Lofton actually maybe put up more receiving yards than Elijah Arroyo did in what was a superb year last year.
And historically, he's done that. If you look at not this past season, but if you look at the season before, I mean, Brock Bowers was his main target, and that's your tight end right there. So look, it's great to have a tight end connection, because you need, if you're going to watch a lot of Miami's like greater like chunk plays that aren't just straight up deep balls, they're usually going to tight ends. You could think of that Elijah Lofton catch against Georgia Tech early on. Sorry, not Elijah Arroyo catch against Georgia Tech. I mean, and I didn't even talk about Elijah Arroyo from the group of tight ends previously. You're talking about one of the faster guys on the team at tight end in terms of his speed. And I think what he showed everybody in the Senior Bowl and in some of those like practice sessions was what we've seen all year long. It's just a matter of having enough footballs to throw to everybody. So, yeah, I would be high on that unit with Carson Beck coming in, given his history of targeting the tight ends and distributing the ball.
All right, there's some important recruiting news for the Miami Hurricanes that has dropped over the last 24 hours or so. I'm so excited that I imagine I will be at the practice that he is at coming up in the third week of March. Rudy, you've seen this young man in person before because he visited, I think it was the Duke game last year. He came down and visited, number 1 overall recruit in the country. And he happens to play offensive tackle, left tackle, which we know is Mario's wheelhouse in recruiting, and Alex Mirabal and Coach Cristobal, have a proven track record in developing offensive tackles. And I think that's why Miami is maybe not leading here yet, but surging. Even Steve Wiltfong from On3 Sports admitted that Miami is starting to surge in the recruitment of Jackson Cantwell, number 1 recruit in the country, 6'8", 305-pound offensive tackle, really a generational type of talent. And Rudy, he's going to be visiting third week of March to watch a spring practice for Miami. He's expected to come in for a summer official visit as well in Cantwell. And this seems like someone who I'm not going to necessarily call him a must get for the class of 2026, but if Miami can pull in this one, you're talking about very likely a top 5 recruiting class in the country.
Yeah, if you're there for that practice, bring your stilts, bring a step ladder, maybe bring a boom mic to interview him, because the dude's a tree. Like, I remember being in my seats in field club, and there's this, this Canes fan who's been around forever named Derek Coe, who knows anybody and everybody. Yep. And he's walking with his, with his sideline pass, and he looks at me and goes, hey, that's Jackson Cantwell. I look over, and you see him towering over everybody else alongside of his mom. I mean, he's the same height as Calais Campbell, who was, a freshman the same year that we were there at Miami, freshman year with me. This dude looked like he ate Calais Campbell, because Calais came in a little skinny, being a defensive lineman playing tight end in Denver. And Jackson comes in offensive line. He's just absolutely huge. So I would actually go out on a limb and say he is a must get for Miami, because if you're going to be a premier program, you need to bring in the largest recruits. And arguably, actually, I don't think it's arguably, I think it's just a fact at this point that Mario Cristobal, Alex Mirabal, they recruit offensive linemen better than anybody else in the country. I mean, if you look at what Miami has done without having the same comparable record as the other national powerhouses and who they're able to bring in and also develop on the offensive line, I would put that group against anybody in the country. That's why you had a guy like Cam Ward come in. That's why you had Carson Beck come in. So to have that reputation with your quarterback recruits and with your offensive talent, you need to have that offensive line. So I think Miami needs to land him to really establish themselves in 2026.
By the way, I want to remind everybody listening to this and watching this that Mario Cristobal was the one who recruited and developed Penei Sewell. I think Oregon assumes that, these kids don't remember what staff was where, because I've heard like a big part of Oregon's recruiting pitch to offensive linemen is, hey, Penei Sewell came here. Look what he's doing in the NFL. And obviously that's rightfully so a part of Mario Cristobal's pitch, because he's actually the one, he and Mirabal, who developed Penei Sewell. Now, in terms of Jackson Cantwell, he's from Missouri, Nixa, Missouri, so he's probably going to feel some pressure to maybe commit to the home state program. I know the Missouri Tigers are very active in his recruitment, and they've had some big NIL bags recently. Georgia, Michigan, Ohio State, very much in the mix there, along with Miami. So hopefully Miami can keep surging. And Rudy, Jackson Cantwell is a multi-sport athlete, because he's also a national champion shot put thrower. So the strength and explosion is certainly there.
I remember a guy from Miami a long time ago, different side of the ball, but another lineman that was a shot put champion as well. That would be Vince Wilfork. So that's a pretty good lineage to have in terms of back in the day, Miami used to have a lot more of their football players on the track and field squad. One, because of scholarship limitations, but also it's just a great way to keep yourself in shape in the offseason. So it was kind of that mandatory, but not really mandatory, because we're not going to tell you it's mandatory. But if you want to play next year, you better be on track and field. But hey, you're telling me that Mario Cristobal didn't just kill quarterbacks at Oregon. Like he actually recruited offensive linemen and defensive players too. Guys like, was it Justin Flo? Yeah, I mean, you tell me. I mean, what have you done for me lately kind of mindset is definitely, it's not new in college football, but kids know better than that.
Yeah, I hope so. So, Cantwell, this is someone who, we're going to see on campus in a few weeks. Hopefully Miami can keep surging there, because surge is the word that's being used to describe Miami's current recruitment of him. Miami's going to have Javian Osborne, a 4-star running back out of Texas. He's also going to be visiting during spring, 6th-ranked running back in the class. And, one of the top recruits in the country, Rudy, just locked in an OV official visit for the summer at Miami. Now, I proceed with caution on this one, because I don't know if he's just going to be taking kind of his free vacations this summer, because he's been a longtime Ohio State commit, top receiver in the class, Chris Henry Jr., who is 6'5", 205 pounds, top wideout in the class, which is usually top wideout in the class. Usually guys Ohio State lands, as we know all too well. He's been committed to Ohio State, I think, for a couple of years. So Chris Henry Jr., who is the son of the late Chris Henry Sr., who, died several years ago, the former Cincinnati Bengal receiver, Chris Henry Jr. is his offspring. He's going to be at Miami May 30th to June 1st. He's also taking official visits this summer to USC, Oregon, and then his last visit is going to be Ohio State, where he's committed. So again, proceed with caution. I don't know if Miami has a real shot here, but Rudy, you always want to get one of those OVs.
You always want to visit. You want to be in the conversation, whether you're realistically in the hunt or not. But you know how those guys recruit. You know how Crisball recruits. It's not over until it's over. And even then, until you show up on campus, it's not over. So, yeah, if you look at that destination, plan, like there's a lot of really nice places going to USC, going up to Oregon in the summertime, which is beautiful over there. You see wide receivers of that size and skill range. Yeah, they usually end up going to Ohio State the last couple of years, which is, it pains all of us to say, but Miami's got to get one of them at some point in time. If he's not the guy, that's fine. But, there's going to be a great education down here too, in terms of how NIL is working, because if the Big Ten keeps trying to push this 2-year sign away all of your rights in NIL to the school, that could definitely play a factor. Because as much as you want to be a part of Ohio State's winning tradition, do you want to be locked in for 2 years and have a school control all of your NIL that you already just recently were granted? So, yeah, it'd be interesting to see how that plays out.
That is a great point. Well, coming up next, the University of Miami, specifically the Canes, are now canon in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. What can we do with this? Hopefully this is only the first step, not the last step. You want to keep it locked right here. We're not done yet on this brand new Locked On Canes. Thank you so much for making Locked On Canes your first listen and your first watch today. We're available free wherever you get your podcasts. We're free on YouTube. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So, Rudy, I talked about with you over text the other day. I'm a little bit burned out on the whole superhero thing. Like, they've made like 100 movies already, TV shows. I'm behind on some of these, but I went, and my wife really wanted to see it, of course, Captain America, Brave New World. Went to see it basically solely for this reason, that my new favorite actor, Leonardo DiCaprio, has been unseated by Danny Ramirez, who plays the new Falcon in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Ramirez, I first came to know of him a few years ago when he was in the new Top Gun movie with Tom Cruise. And then I realized, I follow this dude on social media. He's from South Florida, huge Miami Hurricanes fan. Like, he's even complaining about the college football playoff committee a few months. Like, he is all in, Danny Ramirez, and all in to the point where he wears in the movie in a training session, he wears that U t-shirt. I'm like cheering in the movie, Rudy, and a lot of people were seeing Danny Ramirez rep in the U. This is some of the best free advertising Miami could get, right?
This is what you call earned media in the marketing and media world, which is where you're not paying anything and you're getting incredible amounts of exposure. I'm surprised your actors list, by the way, isn't Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson 1, Daniel Ramirez 2, and like Sylvester Stallone 3.
That's a fair point. How did I forget about The Rock? Well, you know what? The Rock does rep Miami a good amount, but not the way Ramirez does.
Not in the movie.
Ramirez is like, he's on message boards. Like, he's a super fan. The Rock is still up there, but Ramirez is now number one.
Yeah, and look, this is something that I think anytime you have this argument where you may have people within athletics at Miami or close to adjacent to saying, it's not that big a brand as everybody else. It's not like your Alabamas and your Michigans. I don't see them in a movie. I don't see them in the largest movie franchise of all time. And we talk about not just a single movie. We're talking about the Marvel Comics universe. Miami could do a whole bunch with this. And it's not about having to, pay for the licensing to have the rights to using like the movie. You already brought Danny Ramirez on campus. He threw out the first pitch to the baseball game. He's meeting all these different kids. Just his media tour alone. Like he was on the Gossip Mags. He was in Us Weekly. And they were talking to them about saying, he was really proud about having his character, bring his Miami upbringing to life in this end. One, for having a Latin American superhero, but also telling kids, he went to the Cosford Cinema on campus last week for a smaller premiere saying,
right.
When I was growing up, that was the time of the late 90s, early 2000s. That was that story, greatest college football team of all time. Those guys were my superheroes because we didn't really have that representation in terms of looking at superhero movies, comic books, and all that. So there's a lot Miami can do here. You can go to the sports business presses about this and talk about how your athletics brand is in a major movie. You can go to advertisers and say, yeah, you could talk about how great that brand value is, but have you guys been shown in this? No, we have. There's a million opportunities to go through. It's a matter of just whether they're capable of taking advantage of the moment.
I thought there was just one casting mistake that they made in this movie because they had, Harrison Ford, obviously great actor, but he's a little washed. Like he's a little on the older side now. He gets to be the Red Hulk. Honestly, Rudy, I thought, have you ever seen Mario Cristobal angry? I thought Mario, he's already turning red in that photo. You turn Cristobal full red. He should have been the Red Hulk. You could have taken this movie full you.
You don't want him angry. You don't want to see him angry. I mean, look, I would love to see Red Hulk Mario Cristobal more often too, because I feel like he's done a very professional job of being even keel. And look, let's just go back to this way. Let's forget this past season. The season before, after that whole Georgia Tech debacle with the with the knee not being down, elbow down, fumble that wasn't a fumble. Do you remember him like grabbing the podium when Susan Miller Degnan was asking questions, and he just like says very like matter of fact, I could break this right now. I wish I could break this right now. That's Red Hulk Mario Cristobal, and I would love to see Red Hulk Mario Cristobal speak out more often, because if you look at the other coaches, I mean, Kirby Smart gets to make everything about everybody's against Georgia all the time. How many coaches get to pull that same act? What was his name? The guy from Indiana this past year.
Oh, Cignetti.
Cignetti, exactly. Like all these Kurt Cignetti, all these guys love to like put this us against the world attitude. Miami created us against the world because it really was us against the world. I'll argue to this day, it's still us against the world. Embrace it. What was to take a Star Wars reference for you? Yes, let the hate flow through you. Let's bring Red Hulk Mario Cristobal. Let's make it a thing.
Man. And you're right. When he was clutching that podium, like I really thought he was going to turn into the Red Hulk. Like I was not buying Harrison Ford's performance. I'm like, all right, Harry. I know you're Indiana Jones, you were Han Solo, but you're not Red Hulk. Mario Cristobal is the only Red Hulk that I recognize. Huge shout out and thank you to Rudy Tomarchio, doing a great job. But before we let you run though, clarify, because you're a former Sebastian the Ibis. And so Miami kind of, a lot of people thought introduced Sebastian's girlfriend a couple months ago, Gigi, but you're telling me Gigi has been around for a while.
Gigi's been around since Sebastian's been around, since the 50s, because Gigi is short for Gertrude. And the only difference is that now they've got like a dedicated head that's always Gigi, with like the sparkly makeup and the cute like little feather tuft hair in the back. But literally it used to just be like, hey, take the hat off Sebastian, put like a little wig on, or put like a pom-pom as like hair. And you had, fix the costume a different way. And you had Gertrude. So every Sebastian was Gertrude at some point in time, with the exception of like, a legend like John Ruth. So yeah, Gigi's been around for a long time. So this whole like hard launch thing, I think this whole like Syracuse rumor was just like a way of like saying, hey, let's reintroduce Gertrude, because she used to always have like a purse. And part of the joke is like, Sebastian's always so fun and outgoing, goes talks to everybody, and Gertrude just comes over, whacks him upside the head and says, hey, let's go. We got business to do. So yeah, that's not new, but what's old is new again. So if you want to bring Gigi around us, I have one like request as a hardcore Miami fan, as a Sebastian the Ibis enthusiast, and I guess at this point consultant in terms of like knowing like how they've done things between John and everybody. Historian, I'll say historian.
Historian, I like that.
Don't make Sebastian and Gertrude and Gigi like Albert and Alberta. Don't make it so that they have to be next to each other at all times, like Mr. and Mrs. Wolf at NC State. Ask Kenton about that. Please don't do that, because he's such a like outgoing character on his own. Like they can live together. They can live in, separate areas. Like they could do so much, but don't like tie him to being like a mascot couple that has to walk around everywhere.
No, Sebastian needs his space. He needs to roam. It's just the way it is.
Sebastian's got to fly around.
Yeah, right, he does. Rudy Tomarchio does an awesome job. Follow him on X at Rudy Tomarchio, Tomarchio. Follow us at Locked On Canes. And my friends, make sure to smash that like button. Subscribe to Locked On Canes on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you get your pods. And we'll talk to you again next time on another episode of Locked On Canes. We are part of the awesome Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.